thank you for staying with us on Nigeria Decides on Plus TV Africa. And of course, today we'll be talking about security generally, especially with a day to the general election. It has become of great concern. It has been a full year since Leah Sharibu was abducted from school. And that calls to question the issue of the Dapchi girls, Chibok girls, and Buniyadi boys who were also attacked in school. So school security, that is security in the academic environment, has become as important as fighting insurgency. We are joined by Lulu Elebwe. He is a political analyst and author. Thank you so much, Lulu, for joining us.
Thank you very much. We
also have Peter Ebedion, security consultant. Thank you as well for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, gentlemen, let's just, as she said, you know, with the opening, it's been a year since Leah, you know, was captured. She's going to turn 15 sometime soon. We don't know exactly when her birthday is, but a year away from her parents. Of course, the parents are feeling the pain. On the other hand, we have absolutely no idea what she's going through or what she's being subjected to where she is. So it brings us home to the issue of security in schools. As much as, like I said earlier on, we want to encourage children in that part of the country to go to school, we also have to ensure that the spaces that they're using in studying or whatever has to be safe. So in the case of Dapchi, it's like a copy and paste of what happened in the Chibok day. And the question that we've been asked, whether in the international community or here locally, how did we let that happen? Again, literally, it was like a copycat. Why did we let that happen again in the first place? I think I'll start with you because you're a security person. How did, because I don't know, is it that we are more of a, we react instead of, you know, being proactive in issues such as security, or maybe generally in everything we do in this country?
Okay, first of all, I'll examine what has happened with the Dapchi case and with the Chibok girls before, and with the sad case with the guys at Buniyadi. I'll first mention that this incident happened in the theater where war was taking place. So, first of all, let me also state that the troops, the federal government troops, the Nigerian army, has been overlabored and overstretched in those places. So, for instance, with the Dapchi case, which was similar to what happened with the Chibok girls case, the commander had withdrawn his men, and within a few hours of that happening, that's when the incident happened. The terrorist struck and they took the girl. And blame was being traded. Same way it happened with the Chibok girls case. The commander said, "Oh, I informed the police. I left the police in charge before, and that was an untruth that was exposed because later on there was an intel report that was leaked online by Sahara reporters showing that the army was aware that there was likelihood of an attack in another region just within that same environment. So when I look at it, I see that these things have happened primarily in the spectrum where there's this war on terrorism going on. So our soldiers are overstretched. Typically, the operations for guarding civil spaces should be left to the police, and the police are probably also not in a position to employ their best hands there.
How do you mean? Because I know, and I totally understand where you're coming from in the case of the soldiers, but for the police, I mean, we should have as many police officers. There's supposed to be a joint task force if need be. So when you say the police is not up to it, how do you mean? Okay,
first of all, we are under-policed as a nation. Typically, the UN indices require that there should be from between 10 to 20 policemen per 1,000 people, or if not, but I mean, the ratio that is prescribed is not what we have on the ground in Nigeria. So there's not we may seem like we have a large and a formidable fighting force or security force, but we're under-policed, we don't have that many numbers when it comes to these people. And again, let me also state that these incidents are not narrowed only to the northeast where this happened. In Lagos, even Lagos here, there are schools within the Lagos urban axis where kidnapping took place in broad daylight, and so let's also keep that in context as well. So what I'm saying is this, that these things happen, and while it seems like it's happening over and over again in Nigeria, in places where war and insurgencies are taking place, these things are common, because the insurgents by nature understand that attacking exposed or sensitive places like that gives them bragging rights. It scores points for them. So that's why they will typically look to exploit the fact that our troops will be typically employed in other places that have more strategic importance.
Okay, now let me bring you in here, Lulu. If we've come to a point as a nation where we need to have all the security officers standing by for our children to go to school, what's the implication of being at this point?
Well, it's an unfortunate situation, because at the end of the day, we talk about education being the pathway to all sorts of things, success and everything else in life. And the people, like you said, not just in the Northeast, but in the rest of the country, sometimes going to school is literally a matter of life and death. You talked about the Chibok girls, the Dapchi girls, the Buniyadi boys. Yeah. There was actually one before any of those ones. This was in 2013, I believe, in I think Mamudo or somewhere in Yobe, where 42 boys were killed, 42 students were killed. So this has been a recurring theme for the last few years, and you're absolutely spot on when you say that. I think part of the problem is we're too reactionary rather than being proactive about things like security. I agree, I absolutely 100% agree that the military is stretched. Our security forces generally stretched, but the military, to be fair to the military, they're not trained for day-to-day security. That's not the role of the military. There's the police, there's, I guess, community.
There's the civil defense.
Civil defense. We have a number of security outfits. So a lot of times, I think the military gets unfairly blamed for things that really are not part of their job description. Yes, we're in a war zone, so you would expect that, yes, the military should have the maybe not final say, yeah, but because they have a lot more of the personnel in those areas.
What's the implication of being at a point where we need to have security stationed at different points because we need our children to be safe in school? What's the implication in a country that has educational goals to achieve? We know that we have how many? Over 10 million out-of-school children, 30 million to be precise. So what's the implication of where we are now?
Well, it's not good. That's the blunt way of putting it. It's not good. Because the reality is every child, I mean, yes, we know these things happen in varying degrees all over the country. But in that region of the country, in the Northeast, the reality is that for any child that wants to go to school, they risk their lives going to school. And I think that's something that we sort of gloss over sometimes. It's literally a life and death matter. And when you talk about the implications of that for us, it's not good as a nation. Because if you have a part of the country where people are afraid, not just afraid to go to school, but there's been case after case where people have gone to school and have not come back home. Some have died, some have been abducted, some have never been seen again. So if we have to start stationing troops at schools or armed guards at schools and those sorts, it's not good for this country.
Would we rather have our children at home?
No, I don't think.
I should add this. Also, in context, I want to look at the US, for example, where we're used to seeing schools being shut up across different states of the US, and these things happen practically every year in the USA. In fact, there's an agitation by people within the security community as well over in the US that they should have armed men in schools. But
well, Donald Trump actually said something like that. Yeah. Even the teachers, arming the teachers.
Yeah, not just armed men, actually arming teachers.
Or even enlisting veterans who are not too far gone into the stage of retirement to be able to come and be armed guardmen in schools. So these things will happen. Now, also, if you remember, one of the ideals of the main insurgent group in Nigeria, Boko Haram, is that education, Western education is bad. So it's only evident that they will attack educational institutions. They will, for instance, attack universities. University of Maiduguri has been under attack quite a few times. Suicide bombers. These things are the modus operandi of this insurgent group, and they do it to score points. If we have to realize that one of the things that we will suffer is the casualties like this will occur. Let me give another example that's important to note. There are measures in place to try and stem these things, but fighting an ongoing battle, and insurgency is by nature going to evolve. It's going to metamorphose into the next stage, For instance, I remember that Gordon Brown, former UK Prime Minister, who is now a UN envoy on education, after the Chibok girls' kidnapping, he was in Nigeria to launch the Safe Schools Initiative, and they tried to mobilize some funding for that, and they've put into play some measure of that program. I don't have the facts yet to know how far they've gone or what their progress level is, but I know that people are taking steps to ensure that these places are more secure. But incidents can and will occur, given the factors of overworking the security forces, for example, bad intel. I mean, you even have army barracks attacked and sometimes overrun. So
troops overrun,
yes.
So yeah. So where do we go from here? Because I was recently in Kaduna. I had the opportunity to go through, look at some schools, and most of these children were studying right in the sun, literally. Classes that had no roof over them. And, well, the governor said he built a particular aspect of, so that children can. The UN, through UNICEF, had like tents, mini tents to accommodate, but the children are now coming out in their numbers because of the school feeding program. So their parents are like, hey, there's food in school, go to school. Yeah. But if those children between their homes and school find themselves caught up in some kidnapping or insurgency or bombing, it makes it okay to just stay at home and not go to school, because this Western education is coming with too many difficulties. Where do we go from here? What solutions, what ideas can we put in play now? Because we can't wait till every election season. We need to examine some of the problems that we have and start talking about it. What things do we need to put in play now for tomorrow?
So I think it's a number of things, and I think we shouldn't mix issues, right? So when we talk about the Kaduna example you gave, for example, there are schools in different parts of the country with exactly that same problem. I think there was a school in, I can't remember if it was in Enugu or Akwa Ibom or somewhere, that the governor had to shut down the school because it was horrible. The videos went around, it was horrendous. Nobody could learn in those kinds of circumstances. But what we're talking about in the Northeast, apart from those issues, is the issue of safety as well. Now, safety in the context of a war on terror is what's going on there. Now, one of the things I've always said, and I did quite a bit of study on the rise of international terrorism a few years ago, and one of the trends is that the countries that have been able to defeat terrorism are the ones that combined military force with the much softer strategy of trying to get rid of that terrorist mindset. Because terrorism isn't just about blowing things up or killing people. It's a mindset. It's an ideology. Of course, so as long as you don't get rid of, if you kill 100 terrorists today, 200 will replace them tomorrow. That's the reality. As long as that mindset is there, that is what will keep happening. And for the people, for the students in these schools, as long as we're not finding ways to rid people of that mentality, these children, unfortunately, will always be in harm's way. That's the unfortunate truth here. Because if you, I mean, I don't know what the makeup of the Nigerian military is, but how many soldiers are you going to put at schools? We have hundreds of thousands, literally, of schools in this country. How many armed soldiers are you going to put there? How many armed policemen are you going to put there? So as long as that mindset is there, those children, unfortunately, will be at risk. That's the reality.
Peter, I don't know if it's happening in Nigeria, but I mean, especially in the UK, in the US, there's a lot of radicalization that's going on social media.
Absolutely.
That's another aspect that ISIS has, you know, taken advantage of. And let's not also lose sight of the fact that ISIS is also, there's a faction of the Boko Haram here in Nigeria that has pledged allegiance to ISIS. So they would also be taking advantage of these strategies they're using for the rest of the world. So how do we, he's given us some ideas, but how do we in that area also help our children? Because look, every child you see today has an iPhone or an iPad or something, and these youngsters are there. Even the ones who might not have access to it, you know, somewhat might be radicalized by peer, you know, friendships and all of those things.
I agree, and I can say with confidence that Nigeria has joined the international community, especially with private sector involvement, to work towards the radicalization of people in the Northeast, not just across Nigeria as well too, but I also ought to say that one of the most efficient ways of radicalizing people is to ensure there is good governance and the reduction of poverty. So until those things are done and done very well, all of our efforts might not be able to crystallize into the desires that we are hoping for.
And good governance in what aspect? How do we go about it?
I mean, even look at what you said about how that school was dilapidated. If you don't put infrastructure in place, I remember there's a state in the country, especially I think it was in River State, yes. The governor at the time focused on building educational infrastructure, and you saw more people flocking into those schools, which is one of the things that the Johnson government also tried to do, to build universities across parts of the country or build emergency schools like we call them. So here's the thing, if we're going to keep working to de-radicalize people, there's something called countering violence extremism. The UN and sister agencies, the DFID works with governments in the Northeast as well and other parts of Nigeria to work to de-radicalize people. So for instance, even with the social media giants, Facebook, WhatsApp for instance has come up with a means to counter fake news, so people can report fake news on there. So fake news is one of the tools for radicalizing people. Again, there's soft tolerance in a way in that region, because one of the goals of terrorists is to instill fear, strike terror into the hearts of people, to soften their resistance to certain values that they held before, to be able to now concede and accept those values. So with the continued onslaught on those people, you see bodies slain, even with the headsmen, they attack people, attack families. So now people are beginning to have a tolerance towards what's been happening, and with that happening, it won't be hard to pick pockets of these people and recruit them into this. So if you look at the case of the girl in the UK who's trying to make it back home from
well, the UK is saying no to her. The Home Secretary has said no, it's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm sorry to say, but that to me is ridiculous. Come on, she's saying she was 15, she didn't know what she was doing, but
how are you certain that you're telling the truth then?
Yeah, but even if she didn't know what she was doing at the time, she's old enough now, and there's still no, I've seen about 3 interviews she's given, there's still no remorse there.
Exactly.
And if I were in the Home Office, the Home Secretary's shoes, I'll do exactly the same thing. There's another girl in the US with in a very similar situation, and the US President and the Secretary of State have said point blank, she's not going to be let back into the country. And I think that's the right that's the right approach.
Sadiq Javid has actually said, look, we're shutting our doors to you. We're not going to have you back.
I think from a professional standpoint, until psychoanalysis is done on those individuals, you might not be able to know for sure if they are back to themselves. And again, I don't want to close the door on that option, because if you're de-radicalizing people who've been terrorists or would-be terrorists, one of the things they should be able to be enticed by is the ability or the provision for a place to be able to come back to normalcy.
But in her own case, though, one of the interviewers asked her about the Manchester bombing and whether or not she felt bad about it. She said yes, she felt bad, but then went ahead to justify it by what was going on. So there was this provocation.
Until you have trained psychoanalysts, put her, because even the military, there's something called PSYOPs, psychological operations. Until you can pick a hostage now, you can pick someone who's walking in to become your agent. You have to put them before professionals who will assess.
Determine. And now let's come back home. Now we are also talking about the posturing of the leadership, because in event of school attacks and all of that, you have to look inward if it's happening and happening again. You know, we've seen serial attacks on schools in Nigeria, and then we have leaders. We're supposed to be checking their posturing as well, from the local government chairman to the governors and the president himself. So looking at our leaders, what's the posturing? What's the body language we see? What's the rhetoric? And how is it encouraging this?
Well, I think part of the problem is a Nigerian problem of not being, we don't learn lessons. We don't learn from history. That's part of our problem in Nigeria. And that's, unfortunately, so when you keep having, when something happens, you can say, yeah, this stuff happens. But when something repeats itself once, twice, 3 times, then there's a problem. There's a systemic problem. And all we have to do is look at how other countries deal with issues. When things happen, Norway had a terrorist attack a few years ago. They hadn't had one before. They haven't had one since. The UK, yes, it went on the up during the ISIS period and all that. But if you look at how they've improved. I mean, after 9/11, there was the 9/11 Commission, the Patriot Act and all those things. The way countries improve is by carrying out reviews when things happen. Okay, what happened? What was supposed to happen? What didn't happen? What didn't work? What worked well? How do we replicate it? What didn't work? How do we prevent it from happening again?
Do you think we've done that in Nigeria?
Not from anything I can see. That's not from any, because like you said at the beginning of the show, it was surreal that the Dapchi thing could happen after Chibok. I did not, for the life of me, I didn't think anything like Chibok could ever happen again. But it happened, and like you said, it was almost a copy and paste. And if I pray we never see anything like that again, but there's nothing I've read or seen since then that gives me any confidence that the schools in that region are as protected as they need to be. Because like you said, these are soft targets: markets, churches, mosques, places that
people congregate.
People congregate, and there's little or no security. And these terrorists, the only thing, their goal is to strike fear to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve.
So are we not using intelligence? Are we not doing anything? Are we just keeping quiet? What essentially is the Ministry of Interior doing, the Minister of Defense, and all the apparatus and all the resources that gets budgeted to all of those quarters? What is happening?
Well, again, not being an insider, he probably knows better about that. But what I would say is, one of the things I say, a lot of people make fun of me for saying it, is we live in a world of perception. And a lot of the time, perception has more of an impact than reality. And the reality of the perception out there is that the government is not doing enough. They might be doing a lot, don't get me wrong, in the background. But the problem is the perception from the rest of the public, especially the people that are most at risk of this sort of thing. The perception is, A, the government doesn't care, B, the government's not doing enough, or for whatever factors. Again, that might be wrong. I don't know.
Okay, for the security consultant here, is it enough to have troops positioned, because obviously it's not working?
I can't say it's not working. The thing is, you position them strategically.
Attacks.
I mean, to be fair, there are attacks that are also foiled, that don't make the news. And I want to give kudos to our military, our armed forces, all our security personnel for doing the job that they're doing despite the inhibitions and challenges that they face. I also want to point out that, again, like you pointed out, leadership can be indicted for some of the wrongs that have happened. So I'll give an example. Typically across the world, even in our circles, we're taught that community policing or cooperating with the community helps in at least being a measure or stopgap towards this. Yes, and then you have a government that to a large extent frowned upon community policing or vigilantes. I remember that there were vigilantes in different states across the north.
I think there's some of them that were trying to help with Chibok.
Exactly, and they were stopped from doing that by the policy of those who were in charge. Yeah. And that literally made these children in the schools where incidents happen sitting dogs. And so until there's a concerted policy that helps to deal with these issues, that doesn't indict somebody for trying to protect his own people by allowing people to to be freely able to give intelligence or information and not be indicted or killed afterwards. Because that's happened a few times. Somebody gives a report of this what happened, and then a few weeks later they come and burn down his family house or burn down his property or even kill him. We've seen that happen until people are confident enough to believe that they will not be victimized for sharing information or for even stepping in to save the day. These things can keep happening. And I'm going to also request that while we, again, embracing technology, I remember when the government, yes, the government came and said there was a ban on drones, on people flying there on their drones.
Yes.
And drone technology can be used in a very, even with Chibok girls kidnapping, one of the things that people have said is that if drones were deployed to even you could have trailed the escape path for some of these people, but because the government
policy
on that,
did offer at some point.
But for the sake of our own national security, you don't embrace everything from a foreign government.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
Yeah, but sorry, but
yes,
I mean, in terms of drones, for example, I can understand the ban on drones, to be honest, because.
I think the airspace.
Yeah, exactly. I think we had a case a couple of months ago where Gatwick Airport in the UK was shut down.
They literally banned it
shut down for about 2 days because drones were sighted. And yes, so I can understand that from that perspective.
My point was the military can deploy some of these technologies.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. So what my point was going to be, but the military should be able to access drones because at the end of the day, it reduces the risk even to the military personnel themselves. Because you have all these unmanned vehicles and all these things. A guy sitting, the person controlling the drone UAV, might not even be anywhere close to Borno State, and so it's safer. They're able to cover more ground that way. Why or if we're not doing it, I don't know.
So, yes,
but I would hope that's something that is being looked at.
Lastly, let's talk about information management, which seems to be a problem. Like you mentioned. There are just some things that the perception is because we don't get information. I remember when we had those killings, there was a disparity in the figures. You know, the army would give a different figure. You know, so how do we deal with information management so that people, as much as we're not saying give us your day-to-day security, information or intel. We're just saying let us be aware. Let's know what is going on.
Yeah, but I think that's a crucial point because. This issue of discrepancies in either number of victims, number of dead people, is part of the reason, is part of what fuels the perception that there's something fishy, even if something's not fishy. Because if the people there are saying that they saw, I mean, I can't remember which case it was, where the people working in the morgue and some of the survivors said they saw over 100 dead bodies, and then I think it was the military and said it was maybe 14 or 20 or something like that. So those kinds of disparities is what fuels this perception that the government is not doing enough or the government is letting this happen. And again, I'm not saying that's what the government is doing, but the government needs to understand that these are the kinds of things that fuel that perception. And when these things happen, I'm not under the illusion that the government has to share every single thing. I can understand operational secrecy and those sorts of things. That's fair enough. But there are certain things, we live in a world where if something happens in China, you and I know within a few seconds because of social media. So these things will get out. So I don't know if it's a case of the government having to hire specialist communications people that can, because these things are important.
The army?
These things are important because, like you said, information management, there are things that wars have been won and lost on information. Yeah. That's the reality. A lot of things the terrorists do is based on propaganda, which is information anyway. Okay,
now we are in a new dispensation. I'd like to call it that because we're on Saturday we're having an election. So
we hope so.
Yes, definitely we hope so, and we believe so. So what's the outlook, and what do we think should be done to ensure safe spaces for Nigerian children in this new dispensation going forward, so that we don't go back to, just a brief on what you think we can do to move on to a point where children go to school and they're comfortable and safe and happy?
First, I'll say is don't reward failure. There's been, and I say this with the utmost respect for the methodologies and doctrines that are being used by our current top brass, but I believe that if those who are in command are not delivering the results, then they should be eased out of position and let other people step into to deliver service as well. One, if you don't reinforce failure, that would be great. Two, the government has a lot of work to do in terms of de-radicalizing people across board. Now, the insurgencies are not only happening in the northeast. Let's use, for instance, what's happened in the southeast of Nigeria, where some people were protesting, demanding for their own republic, and then it seemed that the option that the military used was a bit high-handed, and you had so those things breed insurgencies as well too. And again, peace is not only the absence of war; it has to also include the presence of justice. Because if that doesn't exist, you're going to have people who are agitating, nursing bias, hate, and when given an outlet, they will put it into the public. So I'm also hoping that the next, if this government decides to continue, or its privilege continue, that they embrace the entirety of Nigerians. You don't have statements from the jump that alienate Nigerians by saying 97% and 5%, and I just hope the government is able to unify people more than it has done.
Quickly, Lolo, we have to wrap this up.
Sure.
Any last words?
Well, Saturday is D-Day, fingers crossed. So please go out and vote. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, would like to know what your thoughts are on security in schools and the abduction of Leah Sharibu. So share with us on social media. We are Plus TV Africa on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. And of course, we are also live on YouTube. It's still Election Studios as Nigeria gets ready to decide on Saturday. We're still talking about issues that we need to consider as we cast our votes. We want to say thank you to our guests.
Thank you so much, Lulu Elebwe and Peter Ebedion, for coming.
Thank you very much.
We'll take a short break and we'll be right back right after. Stay tuned.